Оля ж укладала, то я як зрозуміла, це ж з якимось...
Якщо Віталій останній, то все нормально.
Віталію хорошо, якщо ми виговоримося, потім він.
Хто виноват? Слово.
У вас 2 хвилини до ефіру, якщо ще можете
Ми ще можемо це все прояснити.
Можете один одному ще.
А там ще
Так що можемо тоді піти, я, наприклад, там далі у нас. Ну, як сидимо, хочеш, можемо так.
Ну, дивіться, я просто по тематикам, які заявлені були, да? Тобто я так розумію, що ти даєш. Потім ми зробимо питання, да?
Ну, у нас, спочатку по експертизі просто йдемо, а потім
півтори годинки, якщо рівно, то було б ідеально. Бо у нас
Зараз ми
питання.
зробимо. Тобто питання...
Good day. Hello, dear participants of our panel discussion, which has the name Crimea within the Media Forum, 10 Years of Russian Aggression in Ukraine, the Path to Justice. And I welcome our viewers, the spectators who are watching the broadcast of all the 4 panel discussions, which is broadcast at the YouTube channel of Ukrinform and the channels of all the participants of the coalition Ukraine 5 AM. This is the Human Rights Coalition, which is the organizer of today's panel discussions. And this organization, let me remind you, the association which unites 38 human rights Ukrainian organizations which deal with documenting of war crimes and crimes against humanity which are committed under the conditions of international armed conflict, under the conditions of armed aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine since 2014. The 20th of February of 2014 is officially acknowledged in Ukraine as the beginning of the Russian aggression, Russian invasion. These dates can be debated as well, as it's obvious that this so-called complex of measures which Russia has done to prepare the invasion into Ukraine, to prepare the occupation of the Crimea and Sevastopol city, and all the events which took place before that, and which created preconditions for the quick control of the Crimean Peninsula, unfortunately need our research more and more. And the most important thing, the investigation, because the events of the beginning of occupation of the Crimea have still not been investigated. And the ones who were organizers and executioners of lots of war crimes which were committed during these 10 years are still not punished. Today we will be speaking about these preconditions and about all the types of war crimes and crimes against humanity which the human rights organizations from the coalition Ukraine 5 AM have documented during these 10 years. And we'll also be speaking how these cases are being investigated, how they are investigated at the pre-trial investigation in the Ukrainian and international courts, what is happening there with those so-called Crimean crimes. And of course, we'll need to say today that what we still did not speak about the political responsibility of the management, political and military management of Ukraine, and about the lessons which were still not learned since 2014, which are still not taken into account by our legislators to deoccupy Crimea, to reintegrate its population, to protect the citizens of Ukraine, even during the armed conflict. So I'd like to introduce the participants of today's discussion, who are the representatives of the organizations who have really authority and expertise in the issues they will be speaking about. Olha Skrypnyk, head of the Crimean Human Rights Group, the coordinator of the expert network of the Crimean platform. Vitalii Sekretar, first deputy head of the Prosecutor's office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol city. Mikita Petrovets, lawyer of the Regional Center for Human Rights. Maria Sulalina, head of the Center for Civil Education Elmenda, the Yalta organization which is working a lot on the territory of the whole country. And also Alexei Tilnenko, head of the board of the human rights organization Crimea SOS, which has been created during the first days of the occupation of Crimea. I welcome you here, dear colleagues, and I hope that we will fruitfully use this hour and a half which we have for this panel discussion. This is the information for our viewers. We decided to bisect this time into two rounds. The first will be the speakers' speeches, the questions from the audience and from our TV viewers, which will be able to hear. And in the second part, I would offer you to hold a discussion on the predefined, the most urgent issues which we need to solve, both in the civil society and among the authorities of Ukraine, for these lessons which have still not been learned to be still learned. So I'm giving the floor to Olha Skrypnyk, the head of the board of the human rights organization, the Crimean Human Rights Group. Please. Good day everyone who is today with us within this media marathon, 10 years of aggression since the beginning of the full-scale war. Yes, it really started 10 years ago. So today we have the date of the 20th February, which is an important date in the context of Crimea, because when we all observed or even were located during the tragic events which took place just not far from here, the certain actions on the occupation of Crimea have started as well. But first of all, I'd like to thank the armed forces of Ukraine and all the defense and security forces of Ukraine that we have this day, that we have the opportunity to wake up today and to go on with our work. I thank you, and I thank all the journalists who are conducting their work in the most dangerous places. This is really the invaluable work. Coming back to the topic of Crimea, at the day, the ones who are from Crimea, this was the day when we first saw the military vehicles which came from Sevastopol. Now it's obvious and it is proved for everyone that it was the planned operation. And during these days it coincided with the shootings at Maidan, the shootings of the peaceful protesters, our citizens. Since the 20th of February, this was the beginning of the military operation which led to occupation of Crimea. And the war started, the war from Russia against Ukraine and the occupation of our territories. Instantly, after the beginning of these events, since the 20th of February, I saw with my own eyes how the human rights organizations and journalists were involved instantly. We didn't even know how it should be named, but now we know that this is the documenting and collection of evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity of Russia. These crimes committed in Crimea and are still being committed during these 10 years. So now looking through the prism of these 10 years, we may say that partially we are still going along this way of justice, sometimes awful, horrific, and also dramatic and tragic way, but we still go along it. This war for me started on the 25th of February, when I saw the Russian military on the 25th of February, when they came and began to occupy some of the areas. Then we had the 26th of February, when we supported the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people. Now it is considered to be the day of resistance. Then we had the 9th of March, when we went to the monuments of Taras Shevchenko, and then our activists have been kidnapped, in particular Anatoly Kovalsky and Andriy Shchikun. This resistance is still going on. And answering and responding to this resistance, Russia has created the high-scale system of repressions and prosecution. This is the machine which confirms again that the residents of the Crimea were resistant, and the myth which Russia tried to impose, they failed to impose, because we had Ukrainians, the Crimean Tatars, the residents of Crimea, who went loudly saying that they are against occupation, paying their price for that. Very often we begin to speak about the sacrifices after the awful events at Donbass in 2014, but Crimea was occupied as well with the victims, and the first casualty was Rishat Ametov, who was kidnapped on the 3rd of March and tortured to death. Tortured, as we see in the liberated cities of Bucha, Irpin, Izum, and which we'll see, unfortunately, more. So these tortures, this horror, these crimes and atrocities are the standard practice of Russian Federation, which is ongoing for 10 years on our territories. So I think that the investment of the civil society in Ukraine is colossal. In fact, it is important. That is why it was important for us to speak through this prism of justice. Then, as a human rights organization, we began to collect this evidence, understanding that so far we didn't even know how it would be used properly. In 2014, it was hard for the state to respond properly to what was taking place, including the level of the investigation and so on, but we understood that it needs to be done. And, in fact, looking at the example of our organization, I may say that during this period of occupation since 2014, we documented at least 1,400 citizens who have become casualties or people affected by these repressions. We are speaking about only politically motivated and religiously motivated, or on the grounds of religion prosecutions. There can be people who were deprived of property and so on. Speaking about prosecution, that is at least 1,400. The substantial part of them are the political prisoners, as we say, the people who were imprisoned because of the political motives. At least 200 of our citizens are now in jail by the fake political cases. They don't get any medical help. Mostly, in the majority of cases, they are tortured, and after the tortures, they don't get medical help as well. Let us be frank. So far, they don't have real chances to be liberated before the end of their sentence. And even after the end of their sentence, they are not always coming back, as it happened with the Ukrainian activist Oleg Prihodko, who should have been out of the Russian colony, but he was imprisoned as well, again. And this is not the first case like that. Mostly, if our citizens are coming back from Russian capture only because their illegal sentence is over, we almost do not have any exchanges. The exchanges which are known within the full-scale war do not include a single person, a single civilian from the Crimea. We have just several examples when our citizen came back before their sentence was over. This is how Hennady Afanasyev was exchanged, and Oleg Sentsov, famous case, who were under detention together. Hennady came back to Ukraine, became an activist, and in 2022 he was voluntarily mobilized, and in December of 2022 he perished in the heroic fight against Russian occupiers. I'd like to remind that we go on collecting signatures to award him with the hero of Ukraine. First of all, because he was fighting for Ukrainian Crimea. He was fighting for that since the first days. He was at all of the protests. Whatever we can do for his family, the wife, the grandmother, his daughter, is to sign this petition. Then there was one more exchange. Timchigos, Mr. Umerov, the representatives of Majlis, which we managed to bring them back thanks to Turkey. But against, these are the majority of the Crimean Tatars who are still in jail. And the big exchange, so-called big exchange in 2019, when 19 political prisoners came back, 5 of them were by so-called Crimean cases. That's it. That's what we have as of today. And we don't have a single mechanism how to bring the Crimean Tatars back. And so for us as the coalition, it is important to work how to find the mechanism to bring back all the civilians, including the Crimeans. So obviously these political processes are of such a high scale that these figures can confirm. At least our database has documented 84,000 of so-called court trials. This is a huge number of judges and prosecutors, FSB employees who are taking part in that. This is the really huge system. And these figures witness about the scale, about the people who take part in that. It is important for us to document not only the victims, but the ones who have something to do with that. That is at least 600 of judges of Crimea and Russian Federation who are directly taking part in the politically motivated proceedings. And I need to emphasize, they understand that. They ignore statements about tortures, all the fake evidence. They are directly taking part in that, as well as the representatives of FSB, the Ministry of Interior of Russia, the prosecutors. They know perfectly what they are doing. According to our opportunity, we give that to our national investigative authorities. First and foremost, the cooperation, which is really close and which we need to mention here. I personally and my many human rights colleagues, this is in fact the cooperation with the Prosecutor's Office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Vitalii will speak about that, but that witnesses about the scale, that this way is ongoing. And I fully agree with Valentina that we already have something to speak about, but on the other hand, we have what to think about, how to move to the result, because the work which has been done is colossal, especially by the civil society during 2014 and 15, and at certain stages when our national system also started its reconstruction, it can become again the leading one. I sincerely believe that Ukraine can become the leading state which will demonstrate the experience of the investigations, and I hope holding accountable. Thank you, Olha. We need to understand, and it was obvious since the first months of the Crimean occupation, that these mass crimes which are taking place are not just isolated facts or cases or some people. In the majority of cases, they are the consequence of the well thought through, moreover, state policy of Russian Federation, which is created for the annexation of Crimea, to take away all the disloyal population to them, to make them citizens of Russia. That is why they conduct planned actions which are registered in the laws of Russian Federation, to conduct pressure onto the citizens of Ukraine so as they could convert to Russian nationality and citizenship, and to act within the Russian jurisdiction. This experience was used in 2022 at the newly occupied territories, as far as we know. And these punitive actions, which started with kidnapping and tortures and detention of people in the secret jails, and their indictments on fake cases went on and on. I'd like to give the floor to Mikita Petrovets so as he could tell about the experience of the researchers of the Regional Center for Human Rights about the colonial policy of Russian Federation. Hello.
So, as we speak about 10 years of occupation, that's a huge period of time, and within this period, so many things have happened, and that's difficult to explain it all and to mention it all within even several hours of discussions. But I will try to do my best and get concentrated on the policies and the goals of such policies and exemplify. We all understand that the Russian Federation is doing its best for the Crimea to look like Russian, not Ukrainian. They changed the demographic composition of the peninsula in order to show just Russians lived here. There were no Ukrainians here. But before Crimean Tatars, there were Greek people, right? Yeah, and for that purpose, they were implementing two forms of policies. The first one, actually squeezing out of our citizens, and then colonization of the peninsula. They were just bringing Russians to inhabit the Crimea, which influences negatively their possible reintegration and actually the occupation. So in what way the prosecution was performed, as well as colonization? There are several instances. Let me start with prosecution and squeezing out. Like Ukrainian business, they forced Ukrainian businesses to get re-registered using Russian legislation. No Ukrainian banks and enterprises had choice either to leave Crimea or continue their operation but using the Russian rules. Apart from that, the issue of education. The curriculum changed, the language of instruction changed in schools. So either the teachers are becoming Russian pedagogues or they leave Crimea, or even prosecuted in the case when they are disagreeing with the policies. Also, prosecution of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which led to the decrease in number of parish. This would be requirements on Russian Federation citizenship of the priests. And also there was a problem that quite often it was considered the illegitimate missionary activities, and it was subject to prosecution as well. Also forced displacement of the citizens of Ukraine from the territory of Crimea to the places of deprivation of liberty in Russia. Here I speak about the citizens of Ukraine who were there in prisons of Crimea before the occupation, but also those who were actually seized by the Russian police. Then nationalization of the property of Ukraine, so-called nationalization because actually it came from the registries of one country to the other, and individual cases of expropriation under various pretexts, like you are foreigners, you don't have any right to be owners of the land plots within this very territory. Either it was illegitimately built or illegitimately worked on, if we speak about agricultural land. And there are so many instances like this. So actually, to crown it all, the militarization of the peninsula, which was happening, and the issues of draft, meaning people were drafted to the military service to serve in the Russian army. And a lot of those people who were drafted to the Russian army had to actually have their service at the territory of the Russian Federation, which again shows the huge displacement of people around Crimea. And there's this other side of the coin. This would be colonization, when the citizens of Russia are urged to move to Crimea. We speak about healthcare professionals, educators, pedagogues, and there were so many programs which supported them. And they were involving Russian businesses to make investments in Crimea. There were certain preferences created for Russian business to invest money into Crimea. Also, they urged people not to be displaced just on their own, but by whole families. And also displacement of various educational institutions of the Russian Federation, and Russian teachers, lecturers were urged to come to Crimea and teach. So this would be just few instances which demonstrate in what way this displacement was happening. And as a result of it all, we can say that according to various estimates, because it's very difficult to provide you with any trustworthy statistical data because Russia is not trustworthy in general, and at the very same time we don't have access to their territory, to their statistical data. We can't actually assess the trustworthiness of the data which is out there. But again, according to various estimates, we were speaking about something like from 500,000 to 800,000 people, meaning those who moved from Russia to the Crimea. Also, it's more difficult to actually properly register the IDPs, so internally displaced persons, because as of 2021, there were something like 50,000 people, but a lot of citizens were not being registered as IDPs. So they say that this figure might be twofold increased, and we might be speaking about something like 100,000 people as of 2021. And actually, this won't be stopped overnight. We need to understand how to reintegrate these territories, because this is not just territorial issue. This would be dealing with those residing in Crimea. And also let me mention yet another practice in the context of children. Now we speak about the large-scale deportation of Ukrainian children. Their adaptation, their being adopted by foster families. And we speak about more than 4,500 children who were either orphans or they were deprived of parental care. And we have all the reasons to believe that part of these children were included into Russian registries and were adopted by Russian families. And at least we can say that something like 100 of these children were for sure adopted by Russian families, and they were moved to the territory of Russian Federation, for example, to Zabaikalia, which is more than 1,000 kilometers from Crimea. And let me actually use the research of my colleagues from Almenda, the Crimean scenario. Crimea became that very platform where Russia started using all these tools, and they were actually they were observing whether it worked or not, and now they are scaling up all these approaches to other temporarily occupied territories. But how do we counter all these tools? That's the key issue. Very logical would be to give the floor to Maria Zolarina, who represents the Almenda Center for Civil Education, because we speak about children. What's going on, and actually what the Russian colonialists are doing in terms of Ukrainian children starting from birth up to getting the Russian citizenship and up to the inclusion into educational process. And please assess the actions taken by Ukrainian government. What they have they been doing in order to at least stay in touch with Ukrainian children? Thank you so much. In the first place, what was already mentioned by colleagues, and it's important to highlight, all the politicians of the Russian Federation, all the policies of the Russian Federation are very comprehensive and complementary. So what's happening with children would be the result of yet another policy of Russia, turning Crimea into Russian peninsula, for it to be in the memory of everybody as Russian land, and to create this myth for the international partners that Crimea is Russian. And for sure, speaking about children, starting with the first days of occupation, they were trying to destroy Ukrainian identity. So this very system has got so many branches. It includes formal education as well as extracurricular activities. Here we speak about the process of indoctrination of children and militarization of children and Russification of children, to put it simply. If we speak about children, then as of today, within the territory of the occupied Crimea, there are 538,000 children. That's a huge amount of children. And out of them, 285,000 children would be school-age children who have to go to the Russian school every day, who are forced to go there. Why forced? Because they don't have an opportunity not to go to the Russian school. They have no opportunity to say no to Russian curriculum. If we have a look at the essence of the Russian curriculum and Russian schooling, and together with the Human Rights Center, we were analyzing textbooks of Russia. Through Russian textbooks, the children are dictated the fact that there's no Ukraine as a sovereign country. Children are getting information that there are enemies around them, meaning Ukraine and the collective West. Children, through various tools, starting with first grades, are dictated that they have to protect their land, and when their land is mentioned, the Russian Federation is meant, and that's actually what Russian Federation is doing with their children for 10 years. Every day they are actually dealing with the propaganda of war and the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and after 2022, the full-scale invasion, we keep on saying that the scale and the speed of these interventions grew. So now we see that the schools, they have various talks about important, as they call it, and they invite Russian military who are telling children about the goals of so-called military operation, special military operation. And they are coming to sixth graders. And actually, these sixth graders shared information with us that recently they had a visit from the so-called heroes of special military operation came to the first graders, and they were urging children to actually support the events aimed at support of the actions of the Russian army. And actually, children have no opportunity to say no to participating in such events. If your teacher tells you you have to draw something for a Russian soldier, well, I beg your pardon, but a 6-year-old child cannot say, no, I won't be drawing it for a Russian soldier. Or if they say so, your parents will be paid a visit and there will be a question, how come your child doesn't want to support our army that is fighting for us? So here we speak about this very extended system where all Ukrainian is prohibited, where children do not have access to Ukrainian language, Ukrainian history, and where, according to statistical data of Russian Federation, Ukrainian language is studied by 1.2% out of all the number of children. And we understand that we can't treat the statistics of the Russian Federation as trustworthy and relevant. But at the very same time, children are actually lured into this constant militarization, and they are being forced to believe in this parallel reality. Because here we don't speak about any history. As we were assessing the history textbooks, wow, it was actually difficult to assess the trustworthiness of facts there. No, they are being shown some parallel reality. And we are saying that children have got to be resisting it somehow, and we understand that such resistance and attempts to actually still see what's going on. It all depends on the family, whether family is telling truth to children, whether these children have got access to any alternative sources of information. And regardless of that, in Crimea, we still have children who are going to Ukrainian schools online. And we still have children who are entering Ukrainian higher educational institutions. And actually, this would be partially an answer to the question what the state of Ukraine is doing. There are some preferential conditions for children from Crimea to enter higher educational institutions, but we still have questions to online education, online schooling. We are not adapted enough for these children with due account of their needs. They are constantly loaded by all this propaganda. They have double workload because they have to go to Russian schools and then attend Ukrainian online schools, and curricula for them shall be properly adapted for them to be perceiving this material easily. At the very same time, there is an issue of working with children who move and enter higher educational institutions. We speak about children who were under occupation for 10 years, and they for sure require some additional attention, some additional psychological support. This would be children who can't go to have some vacation or to have some Easter holidays with their relatives. If they leave for good so far, and their movement is limited. If we want to still support some connections, if we want more and more children to be coming here, we need to understand their needs and meet their needs in reintegration. The other part we are speaking about in the context of Crimea and children would be all this block of militarization, which actually covers children within the formal education and extracurricular education. When we speak about youth army, the movement of the first Crimea Patriot Center activities, behind all these movements, there are specific people who are responsible for implementation of all these extracurricular activities. And unfortunately, for an extended period of time, we didn't pay proper attention to these very associations and events, and the international sanctions were introduced too late. For us, it's very important to show that that's a violation and that that's a crime, and this crime shall be punished. There shall be a proper prosecution. I believe in the second part of our discussion we'll mention this, because when we speak about the comprehensive nature of destruction of identity, we still have the question of proper qualification at the national level, because to find the person guilty for collaboration would not reveal the comprehensive nature of this crime. We, as Ukraine, still have got this homework to properly qualify all these crimes. In the first place, to hold the perpetrators liable for the crimes which have already been committed. And also, we need to deter other cases like this. Yeah, I believe in the round of the discussion, you will ask these questions to the prosecutor. I would like to give the floor to Alexei Ternenko, head of the board, Crimea SOS, Human Rights Advocacy Organization. So, every speaker was mentioning the actions committed by Russia and the actions which actually result in certain documents being issued, starting with the birth certificate of a child or death certificate of a Ukrainian citizen within the territory of Crimea. Within all these 10 years, there were some issues subject to discussion. I remember all these human rights organizations were including into their agendas all these issues, necessary amendments to the legislation, etc., in order to protect our citizens in Crimea and in Sevastopol, and to provide them with an opportunity to actually continue their employment and their education at the liberated territory. How about the issue of documents right now? Previously, they were saying the more Ukrainian documents a person would have, the greater would be the presence of Ukraine. And it really mattered for foreign partners, because this narrative that everybody supports Russia in Crimea and just Russian citizens in Crimea, yeah, it was widely used in the recent years. Maybe your organization has got some interesting data as regards this. Yes, thank you so much. I would like to confirm and say we've gathered here together in order to discuss the responsibility, justice, but all these notions, all these processes are very long-lasting processes. And partially responding to your question, I may say that the state didn't cope with the task of identifying and getting information from the open source data they had within this 10 years as regards the citizens who stayed at the occupied territory. And colleagues before me were correctly mentioning that there are some obvious war crimes, crimes against humanity, there are facts of torture, and there are violent disappearances, torture, extrajudicial killings, and this was all done in Crimea, and then actually they started repeating it, including executions at the other occupied territories. And if to have a look at other violations of human rights, this would be sustaining the proper level of life, access to educational institutions, access to medicine. This actually was all linked to the Russian citizenship. If you wanted to get access to all these services, you had to actually welcome the Russian passport in your pocket. Russia started this policy since the very beginning, starting from 2014, as they actually announced the act of Crimea becoming part of Russia. After that, in 2016, they passed certain norms that the citizens had to inform that they had dual citizenship, meaning Ukrainian one. And after the full-scale invasion, this also had its continuation. And in March and April 2022, they issued some bylaws pertaining to children. Well, children were deprived of an opportunity to still have the citizenship of Ukraine, and those social, educational, or medical institutions where they were registered and where they were provided with services could actually do whatever they wanted with these children. We are going back to slavery this way. All the heads of these institutions, all the directors of these institutions actually could write such a document which would cause the refusal from Ukrainian citizenship of these children. As we are saying that Russia actually didn't deal properly with the creation of propaganda myth that in Crimea allegedly there was no resistance, but we still see the resistance in Crimea. Let us be frank, dear colleagues, there are still attempts of this resistance, and actually Russians are still sticking to this narrative of theirs. Well, actually there is some truth behind it, but still we have to act non-stop and keep on saying that this was not happening, this is not truth, and this were actually steps people had to take. And if a person was saying no to the Russian passport, and just actually 330,000 people said no to the Russian passports. Others actually couldn't say no, because you can't find employment if you don't have Russian passport. But actually those enterprises which were offering employment to Ukrainian citizens without the Russian passport had to pay the fine, something like $500,000.
Secondly, they couldn't get any medical care, or they could lose their property. So the right for the private property was in fact violated. They were under the threat. And as of now, as some researchers of my colleagues show, the huge number of verdicts and court rulings are about the, in fact, confiscation of this property. That is what is taking place in Crimea. That is if we speak about what Russia has done. If we speak about what was done by Ukraine and our international partners, and did not do, right? Yes, even more they did not do. So after the beginning of full-scale invasion in 2022, the Council of Europe has acknowledged that all the documents issued at the occupied territories, including to the citizens of Ukraine, are not acting. And looking at the propaganda which we have in Crimea, decreased the number of people who thought that they can leave the occupied territories. So all of the travel documents issued there were considered void. Since 2014, everybody was fighting for that. We, Crimea SOS, as an organization which was always created for the people, we were always taking care about people, and we were helping as much as we could. So we did not follow the strategy of dotty interventions, some targeted actions or strategic cases, because it is not working like that in our state. We need to help anyone who you can reach. So how did it take place, really? On the one hand, the Russian passport is easier to get than any other paper. On the other hand, the Ukrainian state says that during these 10 years, you need to arrive, you need to stand in long queues. Let me remind you, even before the full-scale invasion, the people who submitted their documents could not go and come back home. They had to wait until the passport is produced. Let me also remind the situations which used to take place before the full-scale invasion, when, for instance, the persons, including children, who are older than 16, there were criminal protocols, administrative protocols created when they came to the continental part to get a passport. So getting the document is one of the few tools to get truthful information about our citizens who are still in the temporarily occupied Crimea and other temporarily occupied territories. During all of these 10 years, together with our colleagues and partners, the single-minded people, we said to the state that we need to take care about people. As of now, the state begins to listen to that. The state started to understand that the main value is our people. Anywhere, wherever they are located at, either at the temporarily occupied territory or non-governmental controlled territory. So obviously the help to preserve this connection between the residents of temporarily occupied territories and Ukraine has to be only strengthened by Ukraine. Lots of measures could help that, including, if we speak about the birth certificate. 10 years have passed already, dear colleagues, and we don't still have the administrative procedure of identifying the facts. The people are told that there is the tool to do that through the courts. Dear colleagues, have you ever been to courts with these people? If you've been there, you may say that the assistance of judges shouldn't even be approached. And it is written with big capital letters. Do not ask when your case is considered, because the courts are overwhelmed with those cases. We lack such resources. I think that Vitalii can tell more now about the importance of these aspects. You see, when the crimes are committed against some little part of the group of people, of course, obviously, they can be proved, and then we can hold the perpetrators accountable. But when those victims are dozens of thousands, let us be realists. It is just impossible, even technically, to do all of that in an adequate manner. And during the adequate time period, it is just not realistic. I hope that the administrative procedure will finally be adopted, and I do hope that... I would like to praise now a bit. Yes, really, as for the passports, Ukraine has moved forward a lot during the recent years, simplified the procedure, but after the full-scale invasion, we could see that if there are no humanitarian corridors and there is no other opportunity for the people to leave but only through abroad, there should be the opportunity to get the documents properly for these people in the consulates, including the consulates. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexei. Of course, there are lots of questions which were for Vitalii already speech, who is the deputy head of the Prosecutor's Office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol City. Vitalii is the secretary. So I will give you a bit more time, because lots of aspects have been mentioned. Let me just tell a couple of words. I'd like to remind our viewers and everyone that how hard it was, including the work of civil society and separate political activists, the whole system of justice in Crimea was restored. The restored work of the Crimean Prosecutor's Office was paralyzed, not only because they had not enough people who were working when the war crimes and other crimes committed on the occupied territories were already dozens of thousands. But after the creation of the prosecutor's office, the investigative authorities were not created, so the prosecutor's office did not have the hands. And in the year, the police was restored, then the security service in a year again. All the Crimean cases were scattered all over the territory of Ukraine. We had to collect them again and to start the investigation, to restart it. It was a long way, but I think that my colleagues would agree that the Crimean Prosecutor's Office is one of the leading prosecutor's offices in Ukraine. It's the pioneer in the investigation of war crimes and in the work with the international courts. And this is where I would like to offer you to start your speech about what the Prosecutor's Office of Crimea and Sevastopol is as of today? And what of what was mentioned above can be investigated? What are the methodologies and capacities for that? Thank you, Valentina, for such nice words. But I need to say that really what you said now, in 2014, when we had the ruling of the National Security and Defense Council about the redislocation of the armed formations and law enforcement authorities, it was done, but it was judicially. The prosecutor's office was also moved, but in fact it was the hiring of new employees from other regions. The institutional memory, which should go from the Crimean Peninsula to the continental part, did not take place in fact. You're right, the first criminal proceedings, which were starting at the continental part of Ukraine already, should have been investigated by different investigative authorities, and the remoteness, the distance was hundreds of thousands of Ukraine, because they were also in Lviv, in Rivne, in Zaporizhia, and the prosecutor's office was in Kyiv. So the investigation of such categories of criminal cases was incredibly difficult. Moreover, since 2014, neither Ukraine nor, I may say, the whole civilized world have faced such a situation, and our prosecutors were not ready to investigate war crimes. Moreover, our lawyers, not all of them, including the prosecutors and investigators and judges, were not taught international humanitarian law. So since 2016, when the prosecutor's office went to get help to the international, to the foreign embassies and international NGOs to get help and training on international humanitarian law, not just to provide the overall criminal qualification to the crimes which are still being committed on the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, but the proper international qualification according to the norms of the international humanitarian and international criminal law. So since 2016, we had the active work ongoing. Moreover, we faced the issues, first of all, that the article is the only one about the war crimes, which is a kind of a blanket one, and it refers to different international documents, which we had to know as well and had to use them. We don't have anything about crimes against humanity. And the prosecutor's office of Crimea went along the way of taking their decision to document all of the crimes committed in Crimea, including any human rights violations, because we understood that the legal assessment should be done not only here on the territory of Ukraine at the level of the national legislation, but at the international level as well. So when we started the cooperation with our partners from NGOs, and all of them are present here today, and we have even more NGOs who we are cooperating with. So when they began to provide us with the materials, we saw that the Prosecutor's Office of Crimea is not the authority in vain. It is the one which really investigates the crimes. They gave this information to the citizens who resided in Crimea, and the first push for this connection between the prosecutor's office and the civil society was leading to the situation that 2,100 of applications came from the citizens who were living in the Crimea or who moved here. This is thanks to our interaction. Article 438, it's not the only one, but still our criminal procedural law foresees that these crimes have to be investigated only by the security services of Ukraine. It would be disastrous if we acted just considering this norm of the law. So the levels of the prosecutor's office for the procedural management, they took the decision to distribute these criminal cases between the police, the security service, and then we got the State Bureau of Investigations. We used to have the prosecutor's investigation, and then we were able to at least decrease the workload for them, to create certain logics in the investigation of these criminal cases, and to investigate them as war crimes, really. Whatever was mentioned by our colleagues, those are forced kidnapping and deportation and forced conscription and drafting and military patriotic upbringing are also subjects for our investigations. Moreover, the subjects which witness that these cases are in the courts and we get the first sentences, which are the first in Ukraine. We were the first in Ukraine to get the sentence on the forced deportation of the people from the territory of the Crimea by the Crimean judges, who did that because the people did not get Russian passports, as if they violated the migration legislation of Russian Federation. We also got the sentences against military commissars who were forcefully involving our civilians to the service in the armed forces of Russian Federation. We have the verdict on the head of Youth Army and Crimean Patriotic Center, which provided the patriotic upbringing of our children, imposing the militarist education on the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. But acknowledging that, as I started to say, lots of the crimes are not just war crimes, but also crimes against humanity. Simultaneously with NGOs and our international partners, we have cooperating with ICC, and as of 2020, when we had the previous Prosecutor, we sent more than a dozen of information notifications about different crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in the Crimea. And before the full-scale invasion, she made a conclusion about the end of the preliminary investigation of the situation in Ukraine. And what was the paradox thing, then the Crimean position was rather strong, rather powerful. I can only thank the people who have cooperated with us and whom we were following step by step to this international institution. Only the full-scale invasion activated this option, and the full-scale investigation of the situation in Ukraine by ICC started. So when only narrow specialists, experts and enthusiasts knew about that, we already had a certain result. Undoubtedly, all the materials which we are collecting, we try to share them with our colleagues who are the Ukrainian agents in other international institutions, like the European Human Rights Court. You know that we are awaiting for the first verdict in the case of Ukraine versus Russian Federation about Crimea. And when the court went with the verdict about the application, it was nice to see the mention about the Prosecutor's Office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol City, the data which was collected together with our partners within the criminal cases. So we are trying to expand our spectrum of activity as much as possible. We are trying to cover as many spheres as possible for the issues of Crimea and those violations which are taking place, the war crimes which are taking place on the territory of Crimea, shouldn't stay at the national level only. They should be assessed also at the international level. We are trying, in this case, if we speak about the full-scale invasion, you know, it's a kind of another layer of aggression of Crimea, because it cut the physical connection with the peninsula. But let us be sincere. Some of the methods appeared which we used not to have since 2014. The uses of the AI mechanisms, the satellite shots, and other technological companies are helping us in the investigation of crimes. So sincerely, we are now finding newer and newer evidence which we couldn't find before, working without access to the territory. This is the new way which gives us the new push for the criminal cases. We are additionally communicating with our partners from the non-governmental sector to strengthen those cases and to send them to court. including in spite of the fact that the prosecutor of the ICC has already started the investigation of the current situation, we go on informing him and providing notifications. During the next week, you will get to know about the new notification which will send to the office of the ICC about the topic which we are discussing today. That is why we are not stopping our work, and we don't even think about the issue to suspend our activity. On the opposite, we are trying to highlight more and more the topic of the Crimea, including the international arena. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. We are working with you for an hour already, and we have half an hour more for the discussion. So during this half an hour, we need to include the question Q&A session. Are there any questions from the hall or from maybe the live broadcast? If not, then in fact we can unite these two rounds, and some of the questions would be posed by me, and later you will be able to pose them from the audience to clarify anything or to get a certain answer from a certain speaker.
То давайте.
So if you're not against this format, then let's start. I've tracked down the key questions, the key issues which are there, which are the most acute as of today, and those which shall be answered here and now on the side of the government, on the side of the state, or from the international organizations. Let us start. Let us start with the topic which pertains to political prosecution. Let me remind you the resolution of the UN court, which actually indignated Ukrainian society. The International UN Court did not agree with the proof of the Ukrainian side that the prosecution of Majlis and prohibition of their activities within the territory of Crimea would be the fact of genocide as regards the Crimean Tatars. And they are more inclined toward it being the political prosecution. What to do with such political prosecutions and actually how to deal with courts like this. Let me also remind you that Interpol is saying no to accepting requests from Ukrainian side for the extradition of those who are already or are already sentenced for commission of war crimes. So, politically motivated cases in Crimea, then exchange of the prisoners, political prisoners, the issue of sticking to international norms within the pre-trial detention facilities and penitentiary system in Russia, access to justice, if we can speak about it in Russia in general. So, how to deal with all this and how to save the political captives of Kremlin. May I start? Thank you for this relevant question. Let me start with mentioning that in the nearest future, there will be a statement, the joint position of all the organizations, meaning 38 organizations that are part of our 5 a.m. coalition. And there will be some answers to the posed questions, because we speak about survivors in the first place. The full-scale invasion, the war of Russia against us lasts for many years, 10 years. And there are several stages to it. So the very beginning, where the shootings to Maidan, something that was happening here within the Revolution of Dignity, then Crimea, then Donbass, and now the full-scale invasion. And up to the 10th anniversary of this war, we will make public our statement. We are actually addressing both Ukraine and our international partners, mentioning what else shall be done, and actually the requirements to Ukraine would be something we repeat again and again. A very simple clause, a very simple item, that's ratification of the Rome Statute. And Mr. Vitalii actually mentioned about it, that the Roman Statute shall be used and ratified by Ukraine. But that's also very important for harmonization of Ukrainian legislation. This will improve the investigations, and actually this will result in many more indictments. Then support of survivors, we don't have it. We don't actually have the survivor-oriented approach. It's of paramount importance nowadays. We have to protect the victims, and that's very important for reparations as well. We would like Russia to be paying reparations, but we need to know everything about the survivors, about the victims, in order to actually pay compensations to each and everybody who suffered to various degree. So we need to provide them with all kinds of support which is out there, and we need to ensure their right to access to reparations in the future. And yet another important issue, which was already mentioned by my colleagues, by Alexei, all the necessary regulatory acts for reintegration of those residing within the temporarily occupied territories. We haven't yet developed everything necessary for that in order to actually restore Ukrainian authorities within the temporarily occupied territories and restore the proper life there for people to live in dignity. And I also resort to our international partners because their support is very important. And they have to stand shoulder to shoulder with us because this war is not just a war against Ukraine. We clearly understand it. That's the war against all the normalcy, all the democratic world, which is why we urge to continue providing Ukraine with military support because there is no other way to stop this evil. And there is no other way to protect the human rights. So we were forced to live in this environment, which is why so many journalists and human rights advocates are at the front line. They have no other way to achieve their freedom for their country. So it's necessary to work on the mechanism, on actually releasing of Ukrainian civilians who are held in captivity. I believe 2024 might become an important year when we change the situation and we will have a common mechanism. So among these mechanisms would be a more active role of UN. I know there's UN fatigue out there, but they still have money, they've got resources, and they may participate more actively. We need powerful coalition of the states that are going to work for this mechanism to be existent, to be there. There shall be some mechanisms of the influence on Russian Federation to make them bring our civilians back. But we need to also develop the mechanism of monitoring of the places of deprivation of liberty. A lot of Ukrainians die because of torture. And we also need support of our international partners for this international proper mechanism of bringing perpetrators to liability, to be actionable, to be operational. So at the national level, that's our responsibility. But at the international level, the states which believe that international justice shall be there might be willing to help us there. Also, what we lack as the state of Ukraine in the context of our survivors, we know that our civilians are held in captivity and our POWs, prisoners of war, have got the right to get assistance. They are getting 100,000 on an annual basis and then yet one more 100,000 after they are released. Also, there's the Center of Legal Assistance when relatives can at least get the assistance they need. But when civilians are coming back, there's nothing for them. No housing initiatives, no preferences in health care. For example, we were trying to provide assistance to one specific person, civilian person, who got out of Russian captivity just to actually deal with the dentist. And, you know, a lot of people are losing teeth because they are bitten out or their teeth are getting rotten because of the conditions. They don't have teeth at all. 32 teeth are gone. And, you know, the cost of it was 140,000 hryvnias. And I'm speaking just about teeth now. So, and this person is given 100,000 after they are released, right? So, yeah, Olha, I'm sorry. Yeah, we are a bit limited in time. How can we solve this issue? Well, it's being solved. It's out in the legislation, but we don't have the mechanism. That's the Ministry of Social Policy, Ministry of Health, and all the other ministries which are responsible for provision of various social services. That's about housing, that's about healthcare. And what's also important would be for us to mention to our international partners that Crimea and everything related to Crimea shall be included into the reparations mechanism. We shall have the registry, a clear-cut registry of losses. And actually, this shall be losses to health, losses due to illegal deprivation of liberty. We don't speak just about immovable assets, but about everything. So this human-centric approach shall be the key approach of ours. Like we have to do as much as possible here on the ground in Ukraine, and only then actually they can scale it up abroad, right? We need to set the best possible example there. Thank you. All had touched upon, or maybe answered a lot of questions I wanted to ask. So I offer each and every one of you to mention which problem shall be solved in the first place by our authorities or with the support of our international partners. And what shall be priority for the projects, for the foundations? Like, very briefly, please. Yes, I would like to dwell upon this separate category. Ms. Olha partially mentioned it. I'd like to say that's clear that there are politically motivated prosecutions. There are people who find themselves behind bars because of Russia and in Russia, including within the territory of the Russian Federation. But also there are Ukrainian civilian hostages, people who were taken away from the newly occupied territories and who also find themselves somewhere. They are either in Crimea or in other temporarily occupied territories, or they were moved, transported, deported to the territory of Russia. So before we start thinking about mechanisms of exchange, we need to think about the mechanisms of identification in the first place. And Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainian government won't be achieving a lot. But our international partners, on the other hand, shall figure out some good, efficient mechanism of at least identifying these people and their whereabouts. Because so far it's clear that so many organizations are doing their best and are using their best effort in order to identify where these people are, who these people are, and actually we are collecting just bits and pieces of such information based on some hearsays and on some pieces of paper, maybe from people who got released from the basements, but there's no systemic collection of information. And they are provided by the lawyers. This information is provided by lawyers and human rights advocates, right? And actually, we see more and more people like this because in Simferopol, they are preparing the third pre-trial detention facility. Yeah, may I ask a clarification question? So, by the in military intelligence office, we have a special department dealing with prisoners of war, POWs. Shall we have a separate department which would have the registry of civilian hostages, those imprisoned at the newly occupied territories occupied after 2014? If I may, I will briefly explain, because we fruitfully work with representatives of such units, and I'm a member of Interdepartmental Commission, and there are members of each and every department of the state. Well, speaking about coordination staff, they are also dealing with civilians, not just with POWs. This is mentioned in its statute, but it's clear that actually there are somehow certain mechanisms which can be used just to POW. So this is within their mandate, but really this work is not sufficient and relatives are dissatisfied. So maybe it's really worth creating some separate unit or department. You know, we are not proponents of creating more and more units, more and more positions, right? But we want to have the one-stop shop approach, right? Because relatives have to go to Ministry of Reintegration, to all the commissions, to the military intelligence unit. And, you know, speaking about POWs, the system is more clear because in the majority of cases, they're being released through the coordination staff. And the coordination staff is working with relatives, but civilians are being released by various ways. For example, they are getting thrown away from the torture houses, and people have got problems proving that they were at these torture houses. I recently was in Dymar, and we consulted 50 families there, and that's great that they've got a Dymar village council, which is well aware of all the mechanisms, and actually they are registering all the horrors and all the other small cities and settlements are being covered with such initiatives. But unfortunately, these people didn't know that they actually had the right, or have the right, to be included into such a registry of persons who were deprived of their liberty by the representatives of the Russian Federation. Okay, but under what ministry this efforts shall be used? What do you offer? Well, now, okay, if to speak historically, just as these institutions were created, and no, Alexei, as we lived in caves, that's too long ago, right? As of today, yeah, I completely agree with Ms. Olha that there is the mandate, we need to be doing this, and we need to be giving feedback to people within the framework of this coordination stuff, you mean, right? I believe what will make our lives easier, well, how we created it by the Ministry of Reintegration, we need to include representatives of appropriate organizations to the coordination staff who will be responsible just for civilian prisoners, hostages. I understand we can't let everybody in because some processes are of confidential nature, but there are representatives of civil society, of Mejlis, or the parliament of Crimean Tatars. We have a mechanism how to actually share the information. We shall not be creating new institutions, but to expand what we already have. And we need to clearly understand who is going to be responsible for the registry. That's the Ukrainian Information Bureau. And they will be providing us with, the coordination staff, with appropriate information. And if we have representatives of the organizations which have got good expertise in certain issues and who are dealing with civilian hostages, it will help having proper communication with relatives. Yes, that's very important. Alexei? Yeah, very short remark. Big problem of ours would be that we create something and then we try to give it into somebody else's hands and then we kind of lose it. The same with this National Informational Bureau and Ministry of Reintegration. It's important to understand who is controlling what, whether to give it into the hands of Ministry of Social Policy, whether the Ministry of Social Policy will have a separate registry of the incurred losses. People have to understand where their loved ones are, what are their whereabouts, what is their condition, and the coordination staff won't help a lot here, but the international organizations and other states that can ensure a certain, intervention, maybe visiting of these people there in order to identify that these are namely these people and they are located here or there. This will be a huge assistance to Ukraine. Then the second question, which was already mentioned and which pertains to online schooling for children from all the occupied territories. Something was done after 2022 and even money was allocated for teachers who are involved into homeschooling of children from Zaporizhia, temporarily occupied territories, and those in Kherson Oblast. And we actually remember this national platform in times of COVID. It was popular, but money was embezzled back then for the creation of this educational platform. Actually, it was not really following the curriculum. There were some civil society initiatives. But as of today, is there some platform? Is there some understanding of children there in Crimea, in what way they can get Ukrainian education, and what do we lack in Ukrainian legislation for these children to be actually painlessly, it may sound strange, but yeah, painlessly to continue their schooling in Ukraine. Briefly, okay, if to be sincere, we lack political will for that, because children from occupied territories are not the key emphasis. Usually, we take more care about children who are abroad. You mean online schooling? Yes, I mean online schooling. Well, in what way we are working with the territories occupied after 2022? It won't work for an extended period of time, because actually we speak about schools which got displaced, relocated. If to speak about the context of Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk Oblast, which have been occupied for an extended period of time, children have got huge educational gaps, and they need this adaptive curriculum. And we've been speaking for years that for the children from the temporarily occupied territories, there is a need to create a separate online school, which will be aimed at bridging the needs, or meeting the needs of these children. Because this would usually be some initiatives, private schools, or just the connection with the displaced school. We have to think about some systemic solutions here, and this is not just about Crimea, but about all the occupied territories, because we've lost this connection with Crimea. Not to lose the connection with children who found themselves under occupation 2 years ago, we need to act quickly. And this is about the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. I strongly hope they can hear us. They can hear the civil society. We see certain actions, and we strongly hope that these actions are going to be efficient, and we won't lose a new generation of children who find themselves under occupation.
So the common question to both Mikita and Vitalii, which is about the fates of the criminal cases and the fate of the ones who are accused of anything at the territory of Russian Federation and occupied Crimea. How do we bring them back? This is the first question. And Vitalii, the question goes to you. How? Well, I don't know. Can we speed up the work of the Ukrainian courts? I do understand that we cannot deal without judicial reform, but how can we speed it up? Because day after day, the number of indictments is higher and higher, and the crimes are not decreasing in number as well. So how don't we bury ourselves under all of this pile of indictments? So please, so as for the ones who are accused of anything, this issue is hard to solve, because if there were no reasons to keep them, it would be easier. But if we know about the international mechanism of bringing them back, hypothetically, we can communicate with international partners to get in touch with them and to bring them back. If we speak about the people who got their sentence, any attempt to bring them back will just face the issue of sentence. So we need to have deals and exchanges, which unfortunately in the context of the civilians is not done. But we need to take into account whether there are people who are having their sentence without any substantiation, as is the result they find themselves in the occupied Crimea, and what they do after that. They cannot just come back to the continental part of Ukraine, and rather often the decision is taken that they need to be deported from Russian Federation. They are moved from Crimea to Russia. They are taken to the detention centers for foreigners, and nobody knows how to bring them back to Ukraine, because the Russian Federation says, we don't care. In this situation, it seems to me the Ukrainian authorities need to control these processes. There are some of the convicted Ukrainian citizens. We can see that they need to be brought back. So we need to work in advance. Not to the so as relatives could think how the person could be brought back and where to cross the border in Estonia or Latvia or anywhere, but the diplomatic institutions should act in advance just to think what the Russian Federation is saying, how we can help. Maybe the embassies of Lithuania or Latvia could cooperate with us and bring them back quicker. Not to spend another half a year in Russia and nobody knows what to do with that. That's why it's important and the Ukrainian authorities have to act quicker. Thank you, Vitalii Sekretar, First Deputy Head of the Prosecutor's Office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol. I will try to be short in my answer. You've got 5 minutes. So the question about the courts, really, if we look at the last year, we have 5 times more indictments because we've got these, in fact, verdicts of guilty. This pile is increasing, and we need to understand that this is the disastrous situation with the judges, the election of judges to the positions in the courts of the first level. So, of course, first we need to finalize this process to have more judges so as they could consider such cases. We are also emailing to restore the consideration of the cases in Kherson courts. Just recently we got the response that we have 11,000 of cases and we cannot have time to get to yours. Sorry, what that response came from one of the courts. And we understand that there are judges who cannot physically have enough time to consider these or those cases, and so many experts were speaking about that. The justice experts and judicial ones. And of course, we feel this lack of the Crimean court, but under the conditions of the full-scale invasion, no one will create it. But no one has never raised the issue, maybe. And the issue is that, speaking about war crimes, we understand that many judges are now facing the issue which we faced in 2016. People have trivially did not study the international humanitarian law. We do not have this practice of the consideration of war crimes. So first of all, any case on war crime is the fight for this process. And it's very hard to promote it, to push it. It's to explain it. Sometimes we even have the question why the war crime is in the Crimea if Crimea does not have war. In 2023, I am still asked such questions. Some people do not acknowledge that the issue of occupation is still the issue of the armed conflict. It's the comprehensive question from the objective circumstances to subjective ones. And it seems to me a huge role is played by the civil society, which is creating special schools for judges. When the judges who can initiate and they would like to be trained, thanks God there are some like that, who are writing sentences which can be really well substantiated. When you read them, you do understand that this is the highly qualified judicial assessment of the circumstances researched during these court trial. But we do not stop on that. We need to move on. Thank you so much. We just have a minute left. So if you've got anything to add to our people in the Crimea, please say that now. There is a question. I do apologize. Sure. Tatiana Pochonchik from Zmina. I have a question to Vitalii Sekretar. I would like to hear about the mapping. Would you share the figures, the indicators or approximate estimates during these 10 years of Russian aggression? How many criminal cases altogether have been registered by the Prosecutor's Office of Crimea on the events which took place in Crimea since 2014? Which articles have been used, like Article 438, maybe any others? And how many cases were given to court? How many sentences or verdicts we have in the courts on Crimean cases? And both about the cases given to courts and about the verdicts, and how many of them were done in absentia, and how many of them were already under detention. The overall number of registered cases is more than 3,200, but we need to understand that many of those cases have the signs of mainstream ones. One criminal case could be started on the fact of the full-scale destroying and ownership of property, but it's not about one object. We researched all the issues with property. For instance, we have the criminal case about the deportation of the civilians from the Crimea to other regions. And it is one, but still it's the only one. But as soon as we find out who the victim is, as soon as we identify the verdict or the judge who deported this or that citizen, as soon as we provide the notice of suspicion, it becomes a separate case and it goes to the court. And in this way, one after another, we work with these cases. As for the indictments sent to the courts, they are more than 550. The sentences are 5 times fewer. There are 107 of them as of now. The qualification can be different. With the Article 146, 162, illegal search, and state treason and territorial integrity and a huge bulk of crimes on collaborationism and propagandists, and the crimes, war crimes, which also have a different range, because as I said, the article is the only one, but war crimes are numerous. That is why the figures are not always speaking us about the objective situation, speaking about 3,000 of them. The crimes, of course, were much more numerous, some of the criminal cases as well. So, moreover, I would tell you, when we had Lozovo amendments, in many cases we were tried to save the time period of the pre-trial investigation, not to get to the court with a request to have pre-trial investigation again. We combined those cases, not to do all the 3,000 of them, but to have requests, because this is just the stupid paperwork which just wastes time and does not give us any outcome. Thanks God it has been cancelled, abolished, and now we can work on that. But so many years have passed. Thank you. I think that you're stuck to the timing. Do we have 1 more minute? I know that there is the need to get to our Crimean residents, so please. Well, in fact, to conclude, I would like to say that we were today speaking about the state authorities and separate NGOs, but the Ukrainian path for justice is the path of each of us, our personal path. Each of us have went along it in this or that way. So to conclude, we'd like to drive your attention that each of the Ukrainians, our citizens, can also be involved in this fight, in the support of our people in the occupied Crimea and other occupied territories. In particular, one of the actions which is accessible to anyone is a letter to free Crimea. This event started yesterday, and it was initiated by the Ukrainian PAN, by Zmina, by the Ministry of Reintegration and the Representative Office of the President. You can write the letters to our political prisoners. According to my experience, this is incredible support when they get letters from real people who know them, who name them by name, and when you're speaking about those people, this is the smallest chance to decrease the risks which they have to be deprived of health, to be tortured to death, and so on. Each of us can take part in that. You can share those stories, and it's very important that our society here at the governmentally controlled territory should know that during these 10 years the Crimea is not only occupied, but it is resistant, and our support is so important for those people. Okay, thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you to those who expressed interest to this to this broadcast, which will be recorded, and later you will be able to watch it again. So now we're speaking to the Crimean residents. Wait for us. I do understand that people are really anxious if they are staying in Crimea. There are lots of fears that Ukraine doesn't have any other way how to liberate Crimea. Russia deprived us of any illusions that it can be liberated both Crimea, Sevastopol, other occupied territories which could be liberated by political and diplomatic ways, and our international partners put a stake on that during all of the 8 years of the full-scale invasion. But here we need to liberate it, and this is the only way out. The Ukrainian army has to come there, and together with it, the civil society and the Ukrainian authorities. So please keep away from the places where the explosions may take place. I wish you health. Stay informed. Thanks to our audience. We'll see you. The third panel discussion is organized by the coalition Ukraine 5 AM, which is about the 10th anniversary of the Crimean occupation and our expectations for justice. It would be about East. See you soon. Goodbye. Thank you.